Today I'm going to talk about the records that were created following the introduction of the 1862 Fine Arts Copyright Act. These records can be found at the National Archives in the Copy Records series and cover artworks and photographs registered over a 50-year period for copyright protection at the Stationers' Hall in London. Over the past decade, several major cataloguing projects supported by the Friends of the National Archives and using volunteers have been capturing the full descriptions of the registered artworks and photographs along with the dates and details of the authors and copyright proprietors. August 2018 saw the final photograph descriptions added to Discovery, our online catalogue, making all of the photographs now keyword searchable. As part of this project, the first 20 years of the artwork registrations, 1862 to 1883, have also been added to Discovery. All in all, it is estimated that some 250,000 records were created between 1862 and 1912, period that the Act was in force, and I hope to give you a broad overview of the records, an understanding of their context and why they were created, and what information they hold. The records that were created by the introduction of the 1862 Fine Arts Copyright Act form part of a wider series of records relating to copyright registration in the 19th and early 20th centuries that are held here. They comprise the registers and registration forms used when registering for copyright protection at the Stationers' Hall and usually include an attached copy of the artwork or photograph being registered. The records can now be found in the Copy Records series, and this talk will focus on the records found in the Copy 1 and the Copy 3 record series. The Copy 1 records contain the registration forms that were filled in by the copyright proprietors, along with any attached artworks or photographs. Here you can see a fairly typical bundle of registration forms with an example of an attached artwork. The forms include a description of the work, the particulars of the author and the copyright proprietor, plus the details of any assignment, i.e. changes in ownership. The Copy 3 record series contains the registers where the information contained on the registration forms was recorded at the Stationers' Hall. There is in addition the label books which are contained in the Copy 2 record series. Although these supplementary work volumes do have particular virtues, especially with regard to trademarks, I will not cover them here. But before talking about how we access these records, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and the process of registration to place the records in context. Here we can see the Stationers' Hall, the home of the Worshipful Company of Stationers where registration took place. The Stationers' Company is one of the 110 London livery companies that were created by tradesmen who joined together to promote, protect and regulate their trades. Formed in 1403, it comprised of the booksellers stationed around St Paul's Cathedral who copied and sold manuscript books. Of course, it was Gutenberg's invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century that revolutionized the dissemination of the written word. Spreading across Europe, William Caxton brought the first printing press across the Channel in 1476, becoming the first printer and retailer of printed books in England. But the printing revolution brought with it a novel problem, that of protecting one's work from piracy. The early admittance of printers to the Stationers' Company proved a far-sighted move, as within 50 years of the first printing press arriving, the manuscript book trade was effectively dead. The Stationers' Company ordinances provided that members had to obtain from the wardens of the company a license to print any work not protected by royal grant and enter that license in the company's registers. The Stationers' Register then became the written record to which disputes regarding ownership of copy could be referred. As a result, from 1554 until 1912, copyright protection was usually secured by registration with the stationer's company. The Stationers' Hall records now held at the National Archives cover the years 1842 to 1924. There were several acts during this period, but it is the records created by the 1862 Fine Arts Copyright Act that concern us here. This was the act that extended copyright protection to paintings, drawings and photographs for the first time under statutory law. The Act followed upon years of artists' grievances that had seen the Society of Arts appoint an Artistic Copyright Committee in 1857 that was tasked with looking at copyright with regard to the fine arts and to petition for legislation to protect artwork in a similar manner to that already enjoyed by literary and other works. Thus, a bill, the Prevention of Fraud and the Moral Rights of the Artist, was presented in 1861 and steered through the Commons by the Solicitor General. Under the new Act, those seeking copyright protection were required to register at Stationers' Hall by completing the registration form with a description of the artwork or photograph, plus the details of the author of the work and the copyright proprietor. The copyright proprietor could then enjoy exclusive right of reproduction of the design, artwork or photograph for a fixed term of 42 years or the life of the author plus 7 years, whichever proved the longer. And they were further encouraged to attach a sketch, outline or photograph of said work to the registration form, as we can see in the example. A representation of a medieval stationer on a notepaper wrapper attached to its registration form and registered in July 1892 by Thomas Chambers and Sons. And it is the attached artworks and photographs that make the series such a rich visual record of Victorian and Edwardian life and sensibilities. This procedure of registration continued up until 1912 and the introduction of the Imperial Copyright Act, after which registering was no longer a requirement. So let's start at the beginning. Here we can see the very first registration under the new Act, a photographic portrait of Tennyson. The description, obscured by the attached copy, reads, "Photograph of Alfred Tennyson, Poet Laureate, No. 1. It was registered in August 1862 by William Jeffrey of 114 Great Russell Street, Bloomsbury. He is given as both copyright proprietor and also the author of the photograph." Here we can see an example of a registration form with the attached work removed. At the top, we can see the name and address of the person seeking a memorandum of copyright to be entered in the register, Peter Henry Emerson of Southwold, Suffolk. Below left, we can see the description of the work, in this case simply, photograph title, Gathering Water Lilies. The middle columns contain the date of any agreement or assignment, i.e. change in ownership, and the names of the parties to that agreement, blank in this case. The last two columns are for the name and address of the copyright proprietor and the author of the work respectively. Peter Henry Emerson is given in both cases, and at the bottom of the form are the date and signature of the copyright proprietor or of the agent acting on their behalf. The given author of the work should be the artist or photographer who physically created the work, but there was some confusion about who exactly constituted the author in the early years of the Act, because many studios mistakenly believed that the author was the person responsible for deciding that the photograph was to be taken rather than the individual operative. They were disabused of this notion by the Court of Appeal's judgment in 1883, but this does mean there is some variation in attributed authorship in the pre-1883 entries. If this gives us an idea of the information the records are likely to contain, how do we access them? A pilot project using volunteers to catalogue the photographs registered under the Act between 1883 and 1912 finished in 2015. A second project to catalogue the photographs and artworks registered between 1862 to 1883 followed. This has just been completed and now means that all of the photographs and artworks registered between 1862 to 1883 are catalogued and fully searchable on discovery. However, the artworks registered between 1883 and 1912 still remain uncatalogued. So we need to access the records in different ways depending upon the type of record and its date range. I'm going to begin with discovery and a simple keyword search of the catalogue material. All I need to do is to use the advanced search function, enter my keyword and limit the search to the relevant series of records by typing copy in the search for or within references field. You can also tailor your searches by date range, etc. I'm interested in the classical artist Lawrence Alma Tadema, so I just need to enter his name, keeping the search as simple as possible. And here we can see the results. The search gives us 41 hits, each one containing the full details gleaned from the registration form and register, along with the document reference required to order the original. All pretty simple, but when it comes to researching the uncatalogued artwork, things become a little tricky, and we need to use the original registers and indexes that were compiled by the clerks at the stationers' hall in the copy 3 record series. Going back to the process itself, once the registration form was filled out, the details were then entered into the registers, of which we can see a typical example here. They served as a record of registration to which any dispute of ownership was referred. Over the 50 years the Act was in force, several changes were made to the registry that are important to note. Up until April 1883, artworks and photographs were registered together, and these registers are known as the General Series. After this date, artworks were registered separately from the photographs in the run known as Paintings and Drawings registers. This continued until June 1906, when the Paintings and Drawings registers were further divided into artistic and commercial works, known respectively as the Artistic Series and the Commercial Series. The clerks created indexes to these registers, of which we can see an example on the screen, and it is with these indexes that we begin our search. They are alphabetically arranged by the surname of the author of the work and the surname of the copyright proprietor, if different. Both the indexes and their registers are contained in the Copy 3 record series. So let's take a closer look. Here we can see detail from the index Copy 3/204, which covers registration made between the 13th of April 1883 to the 28th of December 1888. It can vary, but this one is subdivided into 4 sections. The date range covered by each of the sections is given at the front of each volume, as illustrated on the left-hand side of the screen. Within this index, under the letter T, I have selected a page containing 2 entries on the same page relating to the artist Lawrence Alma Tadema. Who is it? 25C, and New Female by the Sea, 26. New Female by the Sea also has a second entry in the index under the letter M for Meyerstein. The 2 separate entries are because, although Tadema is the author of the work, he is not the copyright proprietor. So let's begin with the first entry. Who is it? 25C. We know from the front of the index that this entry falls in the period 26th of May 1884 to the 16th of April 1886. The C designates that a copy of the work has been attached to the registration form. As mentioned, there are slight variations over the half-century that the indexes cover. The C annotation is only included in the indexes from April 1882 onwards. Prior to this, the index gives no indication as to whether or not a work has been attached to the registration form, The later indexes also give the volume number of the register as well as the page number, and some also have the year indicated in red ink in the margin. But back to our example, to locate the index entry, we need to identify the copy 3 register covering the corresponding period, and within that register, go to folio 25. So as we know, the index entry falls within the period the 26th of May 1884 to the 16th of June 1886, we can browse the paintings and drawings registers in copy 3 covering that period on discovery. You can see from the run that there are 3 registers that cover 1884 to 1886, and in some cases it will be necessary to order up more than one register to find the correct one. However, we can make an educated guess, and as each register contains around 300 folios and we want folio 25, copy 3/120 is the likely register. And here we can see the register copy 3/120 open at folio 25. Oil painting entitled, Who Is It? 3 females in a room measuring 11 3/8 inches high by 8 7/8 inches wide, with the precise date of registration given as 2nd of August 1884, and it is this precise date that allows us to identify the registration form with the attached copy of the artwork in the Copy 1 record series. Looking at the run of registration forms in Copy 1, we can see that for the entries made in August 1884, we need to order Copy 1/66. And here is the registration form for Tadima's Who Is It, registered on the 2nd of August 1884. And the attached photograph of Tadima's painting Who Is It. So in this case, the copy is actually a photograph of the original artwork. But let's look at some more Tadima examples. Here we can see the registration form for the second Tadima entry taken from the index, Nude Female by the Sea. And you'll remember that we had 2 entries in the index under both Tadima and Mayerstein. Here we can see Emil Mayerstein's details given as the copyright proprietor, plus the date of the assignment of ownership of the rights from Tadima to Mayerstein dated as 6th of August 1884. In this case, Mayerstein has chosen not to attach any copy of the work being registered to the form. To give you an idea of the variations you can find, I've selected some further examples of Tadima's registration. This design, registered in November 1885, is entitled The First Singing Lesson, produced for the music publishers Novello Ura and Company. Here we can see 2 Tadima registrations entered in November 1883 on a single form. A watercolour entitled A Street Altar, and an oil painting entitled Well-Known Footsteps. In this case, Tadima has chosen not to attach any copies, but has given a detailed description of the 2 works. And here we have an oil painting entitled A Silent Greeting, registered in December 1889. This time, instead of attaching a copy, Tadima has made a rough ink sketch of the artwork directly onto the form, as well as giving a detailed written description. And another oil painting entitled Antistius Labion, registered in September 1874, and this time with a much more detailed ink sketch. And lastly, here we can see a photograph of Tadima himself in his studio, which was registered for copyright protection in February 1896 by a Joe Parking Mail of West Hampstead. So I hope that these examples have given you a feel for using Discovery, as well as using the index and registers in the Copy 3 record series to access the uncatalogued artwork. As an aide-memoire, the top table shows us how to search depending upon the medium and the period. The bottom table gives us the copy-3 document references for the registers and the register indexes that cover the 1862 Fine Arts Copyright Act. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this talk, and I hope it kindles further interest in this vast, uncurated collection of Victorian and Edwardian photographs and artwork. We are planning to run a future cataloguing project to add the details of the later artworks registered between 1883 to 1912 to discovery. Please see the volunteers pages on our website for details of our current cataloguing project and for further updates. Thank you.